The year was 2387, and space had become humanity's new home. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Terra Nova, watching the stars through the large window in front of him.
Ow.
The ship was not built for war. It was made for exploring and mining, with tools to dig through asteroids and find valuable metals. Jake had been doing this job for 10 years, and he loved the piece of space. "Captain, we're getting close to the asteroid field," said Lisa Parker, the chief engineer. She was a smart woman with short brown hair who could fix anything on the ship. "The scanners show lots of good metal in those rocks." Jake nodded and smiled. "Good work, Lisa. Let's get the mining equipment ready." He turned to look at his crew. These people were his family now. They had been together for 3 years, traveling from star to star. Looking for materials that Earth and the colonies needed, Dr. Amy Foster was checking her medical supplies in the corner. She was the ship's doctor, always ready to help if someone got hurt. Amy had joined them 2 years ago after her husband died in a mining accident. She said the work helped her forget the pain. Ryan Davis sat at the weapons console, but there was not much for him to do. The Terra Nova only had basic shields and a few small guns to protect against space pirates. Ryan was a former soldier who wanted a quiet life, but he still kept his skills sharp just in case. "Captain, I'm seeing something strange on the long-range scanners," Ryan said, his voice becoming serious. "There are ships coming toward us, big ones." Jake walked over to look at the screen. The dots were moving fast, too fast for normal cargo ships. How many? At least 20, maybe more? They're still too far away to get a clear reading, but they're definitely military ships. The crew became quiet. They all knew that human military ships were supposed to be weeks away from this area. Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach. "Open a communication channel," Jake ordered. "Maybe they're just passing through." The main screen flickered and showed the face of something that was not human. The creature had a face that looked like it was made of blue crystals, with sharp edges and glowing eyes. When it spoke, its voice was like breaking glass. "Human vessel, you are in territory that belongs to the Zephyrian Empire. You will leave immediately." Jake tried to stay calm. First contact with a new alien species was always dangerous, but it could also be an opportunity for peace. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth ship Terra Nova. We're here on a peaceful mining mission. We didn't know this area was claimed by anyone." The crystal face showed no emotion. "I am Admiral Kextu of the 7th Fleet. Your people have spread too far into space. You take what does not belong to you. This ends now." "Admiral, we can talk about this," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm sure we can find a solution that works for both our peoples. We don't want any trouble." The alien's eyes glowed brighter. "You speak of peace, but you are weak. Your species is soft and pathetic. You will remove all human colonies from our space, or we will remove them for you." Jake felt his heart beating faster. "Sir, we're explorers and miners, not soldiers. Not here to fight anyone. There's been a misunderstanding about territory. Our governments can work it out." Admiral Kextu made a sound like rocks grinding together. In the Zephyrian culture, trying to negotiate was seen as weakness. Their society was built on strength and conquest. They had never met a species that tried to solve problems with words instead of weapons. "You prove my point, human. You beg? Like a wounded animal, your people are not worthy of the stars." The screen went dark. Jake stood there for a moment, trying to think of what to do next. Then Ryan shouted from his station. "Captain, they're targeting the mining station." Jake spun around to look at the tactical display. Olympus Base was a small mining station with about 3,000 people. Most of them were families who had come to the asteroid belt to start new lives. There were children there, playing in the station's parks while their parents worked. "Get me a channel to Olympus Base," Jake ordered. The face of Commander Pete Williams appeared on the screen. He was an older man with gray hair who had been running the station for 5 years. "Jake, what's going on out there?" "Our sensors are showing a whole fleet of unknown ships." "Pete, you need to evacuate the station right now. These aliens are hostile and I think they're about to attack." Pete's face went pale. "Evacuate, Jake. We have 3,000 people here. It would take hours to get everyone to the escape pods. Then, "Start now," Jake said. "Get the children first." Before Pete could answer, the screen exploded with light. Jake watched in horror as the Zephyrian ships opened fire on Olympus base. The station's shields lasted only a few seconds before the alien weapons tore through them. "No," Jake shouted, but there was nothing he could do. The Terra Nova was too far away and had no weapons that could fight a whole fleet. The Zephyrian ships used bright blue beams that cut through the station's metal walls like they were made of paper. Jake could see the station breaking apart, pieces of it floating away into space. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Escape pods were launching from the dying station. Small ships carrying families and children, trying to get away from the destruction. But the Zephyrian ships were hunting them down one by one. The alien beams reached out and destroyed each pod, making sure no one survived. "They're killing the escape pods," Amy whispered, her hands covering her mouth. "There are children in those pods." Jake watched as the last escape pod was destroyed. Commander Pete Williams had probably been in that one, trying to save his people, until the very end. In just 10 minutes, 3,000 human lives had been wiped out. Captain Ryan said quietly, "They're coming for us now." Jake looked at the tactical display. 5 Zephyrian ships were moving toward the Terra Nova, he knew. His ship could not fight them, but maybe it could run. "Lisa, give me everything the engines have. We need to get out of here." "Already on it, Captain. We're running at maximum speed." The Terra Nova turned away from the destruction and ran toward the edge of the system. Jake could feel the ship shaking. As Lisa pushed the engines beyond their normal limits, behind them, the Zephyrian ships were following. But they were not trying very hard to catch up. Admiral Kexthu was letting them go on purpose. Wanted them to reach Earth and tell other humans what had happened. He wanted them to know that the Zephyrian Empire was coming, and that resistance was useless. As they jumped to hyperspace, Jake took one last look at where Olympus base had been. Now, there was only empty space and floating debris. 3,000. People had died simply because they were in the wrong place when the aliens decided to start a war, Dr. Amy. Foster was treating Ryan for shock. The former soldier was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. Lisa Parker was crying quietly as she worked on the engines. They had all lost friends on that station. Jake sat in his captain's chair and thought about what he had to do next. Had to get to Earth and tell them what had happened. He had to make sure that the images of the destroyed escape pods reached every human colony. People needed to know what they were dealing with. The Zephyrians thought they had won an easy victory. They thought humans were weak because Jake had tried to negotiate instead of fight. They had no idea what they had just started, as the Terra Nova raced through hyperspace toward Earth. Jake made a promise to himself and to the memory of everyone who had died at Olympus base. The aliens wanted a fight. Now they were going to get one. The news of Olympus base spread across human space like wildfire. Jake Morrison had delivered his report to Earth Command, and within hours, every human colony knew what had happened. The images of destroyed escape pods played on news screens everywhere. Children and families, murdered in cold blood by an alien empire that saw humans as nothing more than pests. Admiral Kexthu was pleased with the fear his attack had created. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crystal Blade, watching reports from his intelligence officers. The humans were panicking, just as he had expected. Their weak nature was showing itself clearly. "Status report," he commanded his second. "In command? Admiral, our forces have taken position around 12 human colonies. The humans are evacuating some worlds, but most are trying to fight back with their primitive weapons." Kexthu made the grinding sound that passed for laughter. "Among his people, let them try. Their weapons cannot even scratch our shields." The Zephyrian Empire had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. Their ships were covered in energy shields that could stop any weapon they had encountered. Their plasma cannons could melt through the strongest metals. They had never lost a war, and they did not expect to start losing now. On the colony world of New Denver, Governor Helen Rodriguez was trying to keep her people calm. The planet had 2 million colonists, mostly farmers and their families who had come here to start fresh lives. Helen had been governor for 8 years, and and she had never expected to face anything like this. How long until the evacuation ships arrive? She asked her assistant. At least 3 days, Governor? Maybe more if they run into those alien ships. Helen looked out the window of her office at the city below. Children were playing in the parks while their parents worked in the fields. They had no idea that death was coming for them from the respawn. Star's daughter husband, Colonel Ben Rodriguez, came into the office wearing his military uniform. Ben commanded the Planetary Defense Force, which was really just a few hundred soldiers with basic weapons. They were meant to deal with criminals and wild animals, not an alien invasion. Helen, we need to talk, Ben said, his face serious. Our scouts report that the alien fleet will be here in 2 days. We have maybe 600 fighters and some old missile launchers. It's not going to be enough. Helen felt her heart sink. What are you saying, Ben? I'm saying we can't win this fight. But maybe we can slow them down long enough for more people to escape. Helen knew what he meant. Ben was going to sacrifice himself and his men to buy time for the evacuation. Wanted to tell him not to do it, but she knew it was the only choice they had. Meanwhile, in the Zephyrian research labs, scientist Velter was studying captured human technology. The humans had left behind weapons and equipment when they evacuated. Some of their smaller colonies. Velter wanted to understand what they were dealing with. Primitive, he said to his assistant. They use simple kinetic weapons that fire metal projectiles. Their energy sources are basic fusion reactors, so it'll be easier than I thought. The Zephyrians had expected to find some challenge in human technology, but everything they found was hundreds of years behind their own science. The humans seemed to rely on brute force rather than elegant solutions. Their ships were heavy and slow, built more like flying trucks than proper warships. Sir, his assistant said, should we be concerned about their large population? Intelligence reports suggest they have over 50 billion people across all their colonies. Velter made a dismissive gesture. Numbers mean nothing without proper technology. 1 million primitives cannot defeat a single advanced warrior. Back on Earth, President Maria Santos was meeting with the United Earth Council. The room was filled with representatives from every human colony, all of them scared and angry about what had happened at Olympus base. We need to surrender, said Representative Jim Walsh from the mining colonies. These aliens are too advanced. If we fight them, they'll kill everyone. Surrender. General Robert Turner stood up from his seat. They murdered 3,000 civilians in cold blood. They're hunting down escape pods with children inside. You want to surrender to that? President Santos raised her hand for silence. General Turner, what are our military capabilities compared to theirs? General Turner pulled up a holographic display showing both fleets. Madam President, the truth is grim. Their ships are faster, their weapons are more powerful, and their shields can stop our best missiles. In a straight fight, we would lose badly. The room fell silent. Everyone knew that General Turner was a good soldier who did not give up easily. If he said they could not win, then the situation was truly hopeless. However, the general continued, we do have some advantages. We know this region of space better than they do. We have more ships, even if they're not as advanced. And we have something they don't seem to understand? What's that? President Santos asked. We're fighting for our homes and our families. They're just conquering another territory. Before anyone could respond, an aide ran into the room. Madam President, we're getting reports from New Denver. The alien fleet has arrived. Everyone turned to watch the live feed on the main screen. The Zephyrian ships appeared like dark shadows against the planet's bright sky. They were beautiful, in a deadly way, with smooth crystal surfaces that reflected the sunlight. Colonel Ben Rodriguez was leading the defense from the command center in New Denver's capital city. His wife Helen stood beside him, refusing to leave even though the evacuation ships had finally arrived for the government officials. All units, this is Colonel Rodriguez. The alien fleet is entering our atmosphere. Remember, we're not trying to win this fight. We're trying to buy time for our people to escape. The human fighters launched from hidden bases around the planet. They were small, fast ships with basic weapons, but they were flown by people who were fighting for their children's lives. The pilots knew they were going to die, but they also knew that every minute they could hold, the aliens would save more lives. The battle was over quickly. The Zephyrian plasma weapons cut through the human ships like they were made of paper. The planetary defense missiles exploded harmlessly against the alien shields. In less than an hour, every human fighter was destroyed. Colonel Rodriguez watched from his command center as the alien ships began bombing the cities. "Helen, you need to get to the evacuation ship now. Not leaving you, Ben."
"Yes, you are."
"Someone needs to tell Earth what happened here. Someone needs to make sure they remember." Helen kissed her husband goodbye and ran for the evacuation ship. Ben stayed at his post, calling out warnings to any humans who might still be listening. Until the command center was destroyed by alien fire, the evacuation ships managed to save about 500,000 people from New Denver. The other 1.5 million were killed when the Zephyrians bombed the planet's surface. The aliens wanted to make sure that no human would ever live there again. Admiral Kextu watched the destruction from his flagship. The human resistance had been even weaker than he had expected. Their weapons were useless, their tactics were predictable, and their leaders were cowards who ran instead of fighting. "Send a message to Emperor Jacquemer," he ordered. "Tell him the humans are defeated. We'll have their surrender within the month." The message was sent across the galaxy to the Zephyrian homeworld. Emperor Jacquemer read it with satisfaction. Another species had been brought under Zephyrian rule, and it had been easier than expected. But the Emperor and his admiral had made a mistake. They thought that because some humans had tried to negotiate and others had run away, the entire species was weak. They did not understand that humans were like fire. When you press down on a small flame, it might seem to go out, but sometimes it just spreads and becomes a bigger fire. The survivors from New Denver reached Earth with stories of the battle. They told of Colonel Rodriguez and his brave soldiers, who had died fighting impossible odds. They told of families murdered by alien weapons, of cities burned from orbit, of 1.5 million people who would never go home again. The Zephyrians expected their message of terror to make humans surrender. Instead, it made them angry. It's very angry. The funeral for New Denver was held on Earth, but it was really a funeral for human innocence. President Maria Santos stood before a crowd of 10 million people, with billions more watching on screens across the colonies. Behind her was a wall, showing the faces of everyone who had died at Olympus Base in New Denver. There were too many faces to count. "They came to us speaking of surrender," President Santos said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "They told us we were weak. They said we were not worthy of the stars. They murdered our children and called it justice." The crowd was quiet, but Maria could feel their anger like heat from a fire. These were not the same people who had debated surrender just weeks ago. The images of destroyed escape pods had changed something deep inside humanity. "They wanted to fight," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "Now they will meet humanity's fury. We do not surrender, do not bow, we fight." The crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard from space. But Maria knew that cheering would not win this war. They needed weapons, and they needed them fast. Deep underground, in a facility that did not officially exist, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes was working on humanity's secret weapon. The Prometheus project had been started 20 years ago. When Earth's leaders first realized that space was not as peaceful as they had hoped, they had prepared for this day, even though they had prayed it would never come. Dr. Hayes, her assistant, called out, "The president is here to see you." Elizabeth looked up from her work. She was a small woman with gray hair, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She had been waiting for this moment for 2 decades. President Santos walked into the laboratory, followed by General Turner and several other officials. They all looked tired and worried, but Elizabeth just smiled. "Madam President, welcome to the Prometheus project. I think you'll be interested in what we've been working on." Elizabeth led them through a series of underground tunnels. The facility was huge, stretching for miles beneath the mountains of Colorado. Thousands of scientists and engineers had been working here in secret, preparing for a war that everyone had hoped would never come. "The first thing you need to understand," Elizabeth explained as they walked, "is that we've been studying human history very carefully. We've learned from every war, every battle, every victory and defeat. The Zephyrians think they know us, but they have no idea what humans are really capable of. They stopped in front of a large window overlooking a construction bay. Inside, workers were building something that looked like a cross between a spaceship and a weapon. It was long and dark, with sharp edges that seemed to cut through the light itself. "This is the Defiance," Elizabeth said proudly.
Wow.
"Our first true warship. It's designed using principles that the Zephyrians have never seen before." General Turner stared at the ship. What makes it so special?" "Everything. The hull is made from compressed matter that's harder than diamond. The weapon system uses concentrated antimatter that can punch through any shield. And the AI system learns from every battle, getting smarter with each fight." President Santos felt a chill run down her spine. "How many of these ships can we build?" "We already have 50 under construction. With the new factories we're building, we can have 500 within 6 months." They moved to another section of the facility, where scientists were working on smaller devices. Elizabeth picked up what looked like a simple metal ball. This is a self-replicating combat drone. You drop one on an enemy planet, and within a week, it becomes 1,000,000 drones. They eat the local materials to make copies of themselves, and they're programmed to destroy anything that isn't human. General Turner took the device and studied it. This is terrifying. War is terrifying, General. Zephyrian started this, but we're going to finish it." Meanwhile, in space, Captain Tony Martinez was getting ready to take command of the first Defiance-class warship. Tony was a veteran of the Merchant Marine who had volunteered for military service after seeing the footage from Olympus base. He was not the most experienced military officer, but he understood space combat. Better than most, his crew was just as unusual. Chief Weapons Officer Linda Chang had been a mining engineer before the war started. She knew how to make things explode, which was exactly what they needed. Engineer Paul Adams had worked on civilian ships his whole life, but he was learning fast how to make military systems work. Captain Linda reported, "All weapon systems are online. The antimatter torpedoes are loaded and ready." Tony nodded. "Good. What about the new combat AI?" "It's running perfectly, sir." "Yeah. The computer is already analyzing Zephyrian battle patterns from the fights at Olympus base in New Denver. It's learning how they think." Defiance was not like any human ship that had ever been built. It was designed for one purpose: to kill the enemy as efficiently as possible. There were no comfortable quarters, no recreational areas, no windows to look at the stars. Every inch of space was dedicated to weapons, shields, and systems that could keep the ship fighting. On the occupied world of New Denver, something else was happening that the Zephyrians had not expected. The humans they had left alive were not accepting their defeat quietly. Carol Mitchell had been a schoolteacher before the invasion, but now she was leading a resistance movement that was making life difficult for the occupying forces. "Remember," she told her fighters, "we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to make them pay for every day they stay on our world." The human resistance used tactics that the Zephyrians had never seen before. They would attack supply convoys and then disappear into the ruins of the cities. They would sabotage equipment and then blend in with the civilian population. They would set traps and use the aliens' own weapons against them. The Zephyrians had expected to rule New Denver easily, but instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy they could not see or understand. Every day, more of their soldiers died. Every night, more of their equipment was destroyed. The humans were like ghosts, were striking from the shadows and vanishing before anyone could fight back. Commander Zekel was in charge of the occupation forces. "These humans fight like cowards," he complained to his officers. "They will not face us in open battle." "Sir," one of his lieutenants said, "perhaps we should increase our security measures. We already have patrols everywhere." "These humans are like insects, hiding in the cracks and coming out to bite us when we're not looking." What the Zephyrians did not understand was that humans had been fighting this kind of war for thousands of years. Every human culture had stories of people who fought against impossible odds, who refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. The resistance fighters on New Denver were drawing on centuries of human experience with guerrilla warfare. Back on Earth, the first reports of the resistance were reaching the government. President Santos smiled when she heard about Carol Mitchell and her fighters. The Zephyrians had thought they were conquering a broken people, but they were discovering that humans were much harder to break than they had expected. Admiral Kexthu was also hearing reports from New Denver. He was not pleased. The humans were supposed to be defeated, but they were still fighting. Worse, they were fighting in ways that his military training had not prepared him for. "Send more troops to New Denver," he ordered. "These human rebels must be crushed." But sending more troops was exactly what the humans wanted. Every Zephyrian soldier on New Denver was a soldier who could not be used to attack other human colonies. The resistance was buying time for Earth to prepare its real response. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes was working 18 hours a day, supervising the construction of humanity's new war machine. The Prometheus project was no longer secret. Factories across human space were building weapons that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Humanity was transforming itself from a peaceful civilization into something much more dangerous. "Doctor," her assistant said, "we're getting reports that the first Defiant Squadron is ready for deployment." Elizabeth looked up from her work and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Good. It's time to show the Zephyrians what happens when you make humans angry." The war was about to change in ways that no one, not even the humans themselves, could fully understand. The first strike came without warning. Admiral Steve Cooper led a fleet of 30 Defiance-class warships into the Kepler system, where the Zephyrians had established a major supply base. The aliens thought they were safe behind their energy shields and superior technology. They were wrong. Captain Tony Martinez watched from the bridge of his ship as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. The Zephyrian base was built on a large asteroid, with defensive platforms surrounding it like a metal web. It looked impossible to attack, but Tony had learned not to trust what things looked like. "All ships, this is Admiral Cooper. Begin Operation Payback. Show them what happens when you hurt our people." The Defiance opened fire first. Its antimatter torpedoes flew through space like angry stars, each one carrying enough power to destroy a city. The Zephyrian shields flared bright blue as they tried to stop the weapons, but the antimatter burned right through them like they were made of paper. "Direct hit on the main platform," reported Linda Chang from her weapons station. "Their shields are down to 30%. The other human ships joined the attack. This was not the careful, honorable combat that the Zephyrians were used to. The humans attacked from all directions at once, using tactics that seemed to have no pattern or logic. They would focus all their fire on one target until it was destroyed, then immediately switch to another. The Zephyrian commander, Admiral Jekver, tried to organize his defense. All ships formed Defensive Formation Alpha, focus fire on their command ship. But the humans did not fight like any enemy the Zephyrians had faced before. When the aliens tried to concentrate their attack on Admiral Cooper's flagship, the other human ships moved to protect it. They used their own vessels as shields, sacrificing themselves to keep their leader alive. Lieutenant Commander Danny Lee was piloting one of the new kamikaze drones, a small ship packed with antimatter explosives. His job was simple: fly into the enemy and explode. It was a suicide mission, but Danny had volunteered without hesitation. "This is for the children on Olympus base," he said as he aimed his drone at the largest Zephyrian cruiser. The drone hit the alien ship at nearly the speed of light. The explosion was so bright that it could be seen from 3 star systems away. The Zephyrian cruiser simply vanished. Along with its crew of 2,000 soldiers, Admiral Jekver stared at his tactical display in shock. "They destroyed their own ship to kill one of ours. What kind of creatures are these humans?" The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the Zephyrian supply base was nothing but floating debris. Not a single alien ship escaped to report what had happened. Admiral Cooper sent a message back to Earth. Payback delivered. Moving to next target? But the humans were not just fighting in space. On Earth, Dr. Karen White was working on weapons that made the antimatter torpedoes look gentle. She was a biologist who had studied alien physiology from the bodies recovered at Olympus base. What she had learned was terrifying. "The Zephyrians have a weakness," she explained to a room full of military officers. "Their crystalline structure depends on specific chemical bonds. If we can disrupt those bonds, their bodies will literally fall apart." General Turner looked at the test results on his tablet. "You've created a biological weapon?" "I've created justice," Karen replied coldly. "They wanted to exterminate us. Now they get to see what extinction looks like." The first bioweapon was deployed at the Zephyrian mining colony on Vega 7, a single human stealth. Ship dropped canisters of the virus into the planet's atmosphere. Within hours, every Zephyrian on the surface was dead, their crystal bodies crumbling into dust. The Zephyrian High Command received the reports with growing alarm. Their soldiers were not just dying, they were dissolving. The humans had created weapons that attacked the very foundation of Zephyrian biology. "How is this possible?" demanded Emperor Jackmer. "Biological warfare is forbidden by every civilized species in the galaxy." His science advisor, Velter, was trembling as he delivered his report. "Majesty, the humans do not seem to consider themselves bound by our rules. They fight in ways that no honorable species would ever use." Meanwhile, the human resistance on New Denver was growing stronger every day. Carol Mitchell had united the scattered groups of survivors into a single fighting force. They had learned to use Zephyrian weapons against their former owners, and they were getting very good at it. "Today we hit their command center," Carol told her fighters. "I think they're safe in their fortress, but we found a way in through the old mining tunnels." The attack was perfectly planned. While the Zephyrians were focused on defending against attacks from above, the humans came from below. They planted explosives throughout the command center and escaped before anyone knew. They were there. Commander Zekel was in a meeting when the explosions started. The building shook like it was caught in an earthquake, and then the lights went out. In the darkness, he could hear human voices speaking words he did not understand. But the tone was clear. They were hunting him. "Sir," one of his officers whispered, "we need to evacuate immediately." But there was nowhere to run. The humans had surrounded the building and were systematically killing everyone inside. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, striking from the shadows and disappearing before the Zephyrians could fight back. When the sun rose the next morning, the Zephyrian command center was a smoking ruin. Commander Zekel and his entire staff were dead. The humans had painted a message on the wall in alien blood. "Remember Olympus base?" News of these defeats was spreading across the galaxy through the neutral trading networks. Species that had never heard of humans before were suddenly very interested in learning about them. The peaceful Altarian Federation sent ambassadors to both sides, hoping to stop the war before it spread further. Ambassador Julie Green represented humanity in the peace talks. She was a former diplomat who had volunteered for the job after her son died in the attack on New Denver. The Altarians expected her to be reasonable and willing to compromise, but they were disappointed. "The Zephyrians started this war by murdering our civilians," Julie said calmly. "They will end it by surrendering unconditionally, or we will end them." The Altarian ambassador was shocked by her cold tone. Surely there must be some room for negotiation. "Both sides have suffered losses." Julie smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Our losses were families and children, murdered for the crime of existing. Their losses are soldiers who chose to fight. There is no comparison." The peace talks failed after just 2 days. The Altarians left with a new understanding of what humans were capable of when they were angry. They sent messages to every species in the galaxy. Do not underestimate the humans. Emperor Jackmer was receiving similar advice from his own military leaders. Admiral Kextu had requested reinforcements 3 times, but each request was more desperate than the last. "Majesty, the humans are not fighting like any species we have encountered before. They use weapons that should not exist. They employ tactics that are considered war crimes by galactic law. They sacrifice their own people without hesitation to achieve victory." The Emperor refused to believe that his mighty empire could be threatened by a species of soft-skinned primitives. "Send the Second Fleet to support Admiral Kextu. These humans will learn to respect Zephyrian power." But as the Second Fleet prepared to depart for human space, reports were coming in from across the war zone. Human ships were appearing everywhere, striking at Zephyrian targets with increasing boldness. The bioweapons were spreading to more colonies. Resistance movements were growing stronger. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes stood in her laboratory, watching the latest battle reports. Humanity was winning, but the cost was changing them into something darker. The weapons they were creating, the tactics they were using, the hatred they were nurturing, all of it was necessary to win the war. But it was also transforming human civilization. Doctor, her assistant said, we're receiving requests from the field for even more powerful weapons. They want something that can destroy entire star systems. Elizabeth nodded slowly. Then we'll give them what they need. The Zephyrians wanted to see humanity's fury. They're about to learn that they have no idea how furious humans can really get. The war was escalating beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, and humanity was just getting started. The final battle began at dawn on the Zephyrian homeworld. Admiral Steve Cooper stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vengeance, watching as the largest fleet in human history dropped out of hyperspace around Zephyr Prime. 500 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a moon. This was Operation Wrath, and it would end the war one way or another. All ships report ready, Admiral, said his communications officer. Cooper looked at the tactical display. The Zephyrian home fleet was massive, over 1,000 ships protecting their capital world. But Cooper had learned something important during this war. Numbers meant nothing if you were willing to sacrifice everything to win. Begin the attack. For Olympus Base. For New Denver. For every human child they murdered, the space around Zephyr Prime exploded into light and fire. Human antimatter torpedoes crashed against Zephyrian shields like waves against a shore. Aliens fought back with their plasma cannons, trying to maintain the defensive formations that had protected them for 1,000 years. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the heavy cruiser New Olympus, led the first wave of attackers. He had been there when this war started, watching helplessly as the aliens destroyed Olympus Base. Now he was back, and he was not helpless anymore. Target their command ship, he ordered his weapons officer. I want Admiral Kextu to see us. Coming. The New Olympus fired everything it had at the Crystal Blade, antimatter torpedoes, plasma cannons, and kinetic railgun rounds, all focused on the Zephyrian flagship. The alien ship's shields flared and sparked, but they held. Admiral Kextu felt his ship shake under the human attack. He had underestimated these creatures from the beginning, and now his empire was paying the price. The humans fought like demons, throwing their ships against his defenses without caring about losses. Sir, his tactical officer reported there, using kamikaze attacks again, or turning their damaged ships into weapons. Kextu watched in horror as a burning human cruiser accelerated toward his formation. Instead of trying to escape, the human crew aimed their dying ship at a Zephyrian destroyer and rammed it at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the space around them. These humans are insane, he whispered. But the humans were not insane. They were angry. Every pilot who died in a kamikaze run remembered the children in the escape pods at Olympus Base. Every ship that sacrificed itself bought time for the others to get closer to their targets. On the surface of Zephyr Prime, Emperor Gaikmer watched the battle from his crystal palace. His advisors were telling him that the humans could not possibly win, but the Emperor could see the truth. His fleet was losing. These soft-skinned primitives were destroying the greatest military force in the galaxy. Majesty, said his science. Advisor Velter, perhaps we should consider negotiating with the humans. The Emperor struck him down with a crystal blade. Zephyrians do not negotiate with inferior species. We fight until we win or die. But the Emperor's certainty was shaken when Dr. Elizabeth Hayes deployed the Prometheus device. The weapon had been built in secret, a project so classified that only a dozen humans knew it existed. It was humanity's ultimate answer to any enemy that threatened their existence. The device was launched from Admiral Cooper's flagship, a small metal sphere that looked harmless floating through space. But when it reached the center of the Zephyrian formation, it began to do something that should have been impossible. The Prometheus device attacked matter itself. It disrupted the quantum bonds that held atoms together, causing them to collapse into pure energy. The effect spread outward like a wave, touching everything in its path. The crystal blade, Admiral Kextu's mighty flagship, began to shimmer and fade. The ship's crystal hull started to dissolve as its molecular structure fell apart. Kextu watched his hands become transparent, then turn to light, then disappear entirely. What have they done? He screamed as his body began to disintegrate. The Prometheus device consumed 20 Zephyrian ships before its power finally faded. The aliens who witnessed it could not believe what they had seen. The humans had created a weapon that could unmake reality itself. Emperor Jekmer felt his confidence crumble like his flagship. These humans were not just advanced, they were something else entirely. They had reached into the fundamental forces of the universe and turned them into weapons. "Contact the human fleet," he ordered. "Tell them I wish to speak with their leader." Admiral Cooper received the Emperor's message. While his fleet was preparing for the final assault on Zephyr Prime, the human admiral looked tired. This war had cost him many friends, and it had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. "Put him through," Cooper said. Emperor Jacquemar's image appeared on the screen. The crystal being who had once seemed so proud and arrogant now looked broken and afraid. "Human Admiral, I request terms for surrender." Cooper studied the alien leader for a long moment. "Unconditional surrender. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your empire will pay reparations for every human life you took, and you will never again threaten any human world." "Those terms are too harsh," the Emperor protested. Cooper's expression did not change. "Those are the only terms you will get. Accept them, or we will finish what you started." The Emperor looked at the human fleet surrounding his world and knew he had no choice. The humans had proven they were willing to destroy entire star systems. To win this war, if he refused their terms, they would turn Zephyr Prime into dust. "I accept your terms," he said quietly. The war was over, but Cooper felt no joy in victory. Too many people had died, and humanity had become something darker in the process. They had won by being more ruthless than their enemies, and that victory came with a price. President Maria Santos received the news of the Zephyrian surrender in her office on Earth. She should have been celebrating. But instead, she felt empty. The humans had saved themselves, but they had also revealed something about their nature that scared even them. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the new Olympus, looking down at Zephyr Prime. The planet was still beautiful, with its crystal cities sparkling in the light of its twin suns. But he knew that beauty was an illusion. The Zephyrians had started this war by murdering children, and they had reaped the consequences of that choice. "Captain," his communications officer said, "we're receiving messages from other species across the galaxy. They all want to establish diplomatic relations with humanity." Jake was not surprised. Word of the war had spread through the neutral trade networks. Every species in the galaxy now knew what happened to those who threatened human civilians. The messages were not really about diplomacy. They were about fear. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes shut down the Prometheus Project facility for the last time. The weapons they had created had saved humanity, but she hoped they would never be needed again. The galaxy was a different place now, and humans were no longer seen as weak newcomers. Carol Mitchell returned to New Denver to help rebuild the world the Zephyrians had destroyed. The resistance movement was over, but she had learned things about warfare that she would never forget. She hoped her children would never need to use those lessons. Years later, when alien diplomats came to Earth to sign trade agreements, they would always ask about the war. They wanted to understand how a species of seemingly peaceful explorers had become the galaxy's most feared. Military power, the humans would tell them the truth. They had not wanted to fight. They had tried diplomacy first. But when the Zephyrians chose to murder human children, they had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. The galaxy learned an important lesson from the Zephyrian War. Humans were not the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But they were the most dangerous when threatened, because they would sacrifice everything to protect their own. Admiral Steve Cooper retired to a quiet farm on Earth, but he kept his uniform in his closet. Sometimes, late at night, he would look up at the stars and remember the friends who had died in the war. They had saved humanity, but the cost had been terrible. The Zephyrian Empire became a human protectorate, its people working to pay off the debt they owed for starting the war. They learned to fear the sight of human ships, knowing that those vessels carried the fury of an entire species, and in the depths of space, other civilizations that had been considering expansion into human territory quietly changed their plans. They had seen what happened to the Zephyrians, and they had no desire to face humanity's wrath themselves. The war was over. But its lessons would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.